In part 2 of this training, we'll now dive deeper into the individual sections of the agreement. By the end of part 2, we'll have explored each section and have an understanding of what is contained within each and how to correctly complete and tips along the way for avoiding common errors. The document is only 15 pages in length, and even better, it's only the first 5 that require either information to be completed or customer signatures. We'll now take a closer look at each page individually so you're comfortable with the agreement when completing with the customer. As we move through each page, we'll highlight the sections that are contained on each page and then have a closer look at what needs to be filled in and how. Let's dive into page 1. On page 1, there are 3 main sections. We have the customer details, the goods description, and the terms and payments. Now let's look at each a bit closer. The customer details section captures all of the important information about the customer, and this is really the first line of sight from an assessment point of view. The very first thing you need to complete is the legal name or title of who is going to be the borrower. We're going to go through examples of how to complete the agreement for each of the different types of borrowers in part 3 of this training. You will then select the customer type by simply ticking the relevant box. In the case where the borrower is a partnership or a trust, you would also follow the arrow and write in the date of the partnership or the date of the trust. The quickest way to find the date in both the partnership or the trust is to do an ABN search, which will give you the date established. An ABN search can be completed free of charge by going to www.abr.business.gov.au and entering the ABN which you'll get from the customer. As a result of the search, you'll be able to see the name associated with the ABN, the type of owning entity, and the date established. Just to confirm if you are unsure, ABN stands for Australian Business Number, and every business must have one to trade as a business in Australia. Next, you'll enter the trading name. This is what the business trades as and will often differ from the legal name. An ABN must be entered in all cases, and if there is a company involved, you'll also enter the ACN or the Australian company number. The business address must be the actual address and not a PO box. Then you just enter the contact name, phone number, and email of the main contact person for that business, which will likely be the person you are completing the agreement with. Section 2 is the goods description and simply captures the description of the equipment being financed. Under brand, model and details, you'll write down the description of the screen being financed and also enter in the quantity. You should leave the serial number empty as you won't have the serial number available at the time you're completing the agreement. You'll also need to confirm what the address is that the screen will be located. If the address will be the same as the address listed in section 1 above, simply just tick the box. If it is a different address to the one that is in section 1, then simply just write in the full address in the space provided. The final section on this page is the terms and payments. This captures the details of the payments for the customer so they know how many payments they have to make and how much those payments will be. When completing, you'll enter the total number of payments in the initial term and the number of rental payments boxes. You'll leave the commencement date empty as you won't know this date and it'll be entered by the finance team later. Then it's simply a case of writing in the rental payment excluding GST and including GST in their applicable boxes. Page 1 is then complete, so it's pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at page 2. There is only one section on page 2, being the guarantor details. The easiest way to understand when to include a guarantor and who needs to be a guarantor is this. Number 1, there needs to be a guarantor on every application. And 2, the individual or the individuals that represent the business must be included as guarantors. So for example, if the borrower is a sole trader, that sole trader will be the guarantor. If it is a partnership, then both partners will be included as guarantors. If you happen to get a partnership that has 4 partners, then all 4 partners would be included as guarantors. And when it's a company, then at least one of the directors of the company must be included as a guarantor. So this raises another important tip. One of the most common delays experienced is when a company is involved and the person entered as a guarantor in the agreement is not actually the director of that company. So be sure to confirm with the customer at the time of completion that the person you're including is definitely a director of the company. The guarantor details capture all of the important personal details about the guarantor. So when completing the guarantor section, you'll include the guarantor's full name, their home address, email and phone number. We've already ticked the next box, which confirms the guarantee being provided by the guarantor is not secured. This is always going to be the case with every agreement. The next three boxes are extremely important to the application and will not only improve the speed that the agreements are assessed, but it also increases the amount of approvals if completed correctly. And let me explain why. Each agreement is assessed by a credit officer who decides the creditworthiness of the application based on different criteria. The one main criteria that significantly improves the creditworthiness is if the customer does own property. So when speaking to the customer, it's very important to ask them whether they personally own property in their own name, and if so, tick the box. You will then ask their estimate of the property value and what the approximate amount owing on the property is. As I mentioned, owning property has a big positive effect on the outcome of assessment. If the customer does own a property in their own name but not their home address, write the address in the blank space here and you'll greatly improve the likelihood of approval. Just to clarify, an agreement can still be approved without owning property. It simply helps and strengthens the application if they do own a property. A common hesitation a customer may have is that they won't want to use their property as security for this agreement. So you can assure them that we won't ever use their property as security, and we've even included a line in there just to confirm that's the case. As we've just covered, property information is simply captured as a means of understanding the financial position, given that we're not capturing any other financial information to assess the agreement. So the sales reps that are the best at confirming whether a guarantor owns property and recording it correctly will have the best approval percentages. As I touched on earlier, there are only two circumstances when more than one guarantor is required. The first one is a partnership. In this case, as there's two partners and both must be included as guarantors. And the second, a trust that has more than one individual trustee. In this case, all individual trustees must be included as guarantors. The only other circumstance you may come across is when there's two directors present when you're with the customer and they both want to be included in the agreement. However, we do only require one director at any time as a minimum for a company. Completing the details for Guarantor 2 is exactly the same as Guarantor 1. If there's only one guarantor required, simply leave this blank and that completes page 2. So let's look at page 3. Page 3 is made up of one very important section, the signatures page, which there are two parts for the customer to sign. The customer acceptance and the guarantor acceptance. This is a critical page because it confirms the customer agrees to the terms of the contract, including the repayment amount that you've entered in the terms and the payments section. By signing, the customer also confirms that all their information has been included correctly, and finally that they accept the terms and conditions of the agreement. There are three parts to this page. The first being the financier's acceptance. You, as the representative for Hallas Media, will sign here. Be sure to put in your full name and then date. Part 2 is the customer acceptance. This must be signed by each individual with their full name written in and then write in the date signed. Then you'll need to indicate in what capacity the customer is signing. The simple rule here is this: if there is a company involved, you will tick the second box noting director. In every other circumstance where there is no company, always tick individual. Nearly all places that a customer or guarantor signs requires the signature to be witnessed, which is done by you. Be sure that all witness signature parts are all completed as a part of your agreement check at the end. The third part is the guarantor acceptance. This must be signed by each person that has been included as a guarantor on the previous page. Any person included as a guarantor must also sign and include their name. Make sure the date is included, and then you'll witness each guarantor's signature. That concludes page 3, the signing page. Let's move on to page 4. There are three main sections on this page: the business use declaration, delivery acknowledgement and installation, and the customer acceptance of the delivery acknowledgement above. The same people who have signed the customer acceptance on page 3 will sign here. The business use declaration confirms that the equipment being financed is being used for business purposes and not for personal use. Completing the delivery and installation acknowledgement is very straightforward. Simply include the customer's details from section 1 on page 1. The last section is the customer acceptance of the delivery and installation acknowledgement. This will be signed in the exact same way as the customer acceptance on page 3, and be sure to witness the customer's signature. That covers everything on page 4. Now let's move on to page 5. So you'll be happy to know this is the last page of the document that requires completion and signatures. This page is devoted to the direct debit request and is made up of 2 parts: the customer details and the customer acceptance. So you shouldn't have any trouble completing the customer details. Enter the customer name and the business address, again which will be the same as section 1 on page 1. Then enter the name of the customer's bank, bank branch, BSB and account numbers in the relevant boxes. Be a bit diligent here. The business account should match the customer who's been included as a borrower. Just check here that the business account details provided relate to the customer, whether it be their legal name or the business name in some way. Customer acceptance is very simple. The same people that signed as the customer on page 3 will sign and date here. So that covers all the pages that you'll be required to complete and have signed by the customer and guarantors. The final pages include the disclosure and terms and conditions pages, which we'll now overview. There are 3 main parts to the terms and conditions pages. The direct debit service agreement. This outlines the obligations of the customer in regards to the payments the customer must make for the facility. Credit reporting information, which outlines how the customer's personal information is handled and used and who they can call if they have a problem. The final section is the terms and conditions pages. These outline all the terms and conditions of the new facility, including the handling of the equipment and their obligations under the contract. It is a legal requirement that all disclosure and terms and conditions pages are always included with the agreement and that they have the opportunity to review prior to signing the agreement. We've now explored every section of the Halast Media rental agreement in detail, and you should have a good understanding of how to correctly complete and have the customers and guarantors sign the agreement so that unnecessary delays are avoided. Remember that correct completion of the agreement first time can save you a lot of time down the process and ensure your commissions are not delayed.